You are flying at 30,000 feet. Your radar can see for 100 miles in every direction. It is the eye of God, but you are about to be shot down by a plane you will never see. This is the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, a 20-ton monster of American engineering designed to dominate the sky. Your cockpit is filled with the hum of advanced electronics. Your mission is built on a simple, powerful promise: technological superiority. The doctrine is called Beyond Visual Range Combat. You will detect the enemy as a tiny blip on your scope. You will lock on. You will fire your AIM-7 Sparrow missile from miles away. A clean, surgical strike. No dogfight. No getting your hands dirty. That was the theory. But down below, hidden by the suffocating green canopy of North Vietnam, your enemy is playing a different game. And they fly the Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17, a small, nimble jet that seems like a relic from a past war. It has no long-range radar, no sophisticated missiles. It has cannons, and a pilot who understands the terrain better than you understand your own instruments. And here is where the official story begins to fray. Your powerful APQ-12 radar has a fatal flaw, an Achilles heel. It is designed to scan the empty expanse of the sky. But when it looks down, the energy bounces off the thousands of hills, valleys, and trees. This creates a blizzard of false signals on your screen, a phenomenon called ground clutter. Trying to find a tiny MiG fighter in that electronic storm is like trying to hear a single footstep in the middle of an earthquake. You are effectively blind, and the Vietnamese pilots, they know this. They fly low. Are so low their wingtips almost skim the rice paddies. They use the mountains themselves as a shield, making your million-dollar radar utterly useless. On April 3, 1965, the first major air battle between Phantoms and MiGs erupted. The American pilots stared at their empty screens, waiting for the blips that never came. They were ambushed from below. The results were a classified disaster. The Pentagon expected a 10-to-1 kill ratio. Instead, they got a brutal 2-to-1. For every 2 MiGs lost, a technologically superior American Phantom was spiraling to the earth in flames. The hunters had become the hunted. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a deliberate, calculated strategy. The Vietnamese pilots seemed to have a perfect map of the Phantom's weaknesses. They knew exactly where to hide. They knew exactly when to strike. This leads to a deeply unsettling question. How? How did they know exactly how to turn America's greatest strength into its most fatal vulnerability? The year is 1960. The dogfight is dead, or so they thought. In the corridors of the Pentagon, a new philosophy was taking hold, forged in the heat of the Cold War and cooled by the logic of computers. The age of the ace, of instinct and aerial artistry, was over. The future belonged to the machine. And that machine had a name: the F-4 Phantom II. You're looking at the pinnacle of 1960s technology. It wasn't designed to be a fighter. It was a missile platform that happened to have a cockpit. 2 massive General Electric J79 engines could push its 30-ton frame past Mach 2. That's over 2,500 kilometers per hour. It could climb like a rocket, straight up to the edge of space. Its AN/APQ-72 radar was the most powerful of its day, a mechanical god's eye that could supposedly see everything for 100 miles. It carried the future in its armament. The AIM-9 Sidewinder, a heat-seeking missile for close encounters. And the main event, the AIM-7 Sparrow, a radar-guided missile meant to kill from beyond the horizon. But look closely at those early Phantoms. Something is missing, something fundamental. There is no gun. The planners, led by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, had decided an internal cannon was obsolete. A relic, like a knight bringing a sword to a tank battle. Why would you need one? The new Bible of air combat was called BVR, Beyond Visual Range. The theory was clean, almost surgical. Your radar picks up a target 10, 20, 30 miles away. You get a lock, you fire, and the enemy pilot dies without ever knowing you were there. It was supposed to be a war of electrons, a battle of systems operators, not warriors. And here's the part nobody talks about. The pilots were trained this way. The gut-wrenching high-G maneuvering of the past was replaced with procedures, checklists, button presses. They were taught to trust the missile, to trust the radar. They were taught that the human element was a liability. This supreme confidence was carried into the skies of Southeast Asia in March 1965. Operation Rolling Thunder began. Phantoms roared off the decks of carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin. But the skies over North Vietnam were not a clean computer simulation. They were a chaotic, humid, and deadly reality. The first shock was the radar. The powerful AN/APQ-72, designed for the cold, clear air over Europe, was nearly blinded by the jungle below. The screen filled with ground clutter, a snowstorm of false signals. Picking out a tiny MiG flying low against the trees was next to impossible. Then came the rules. The politicians in Washington, terrified of hitting a Soviet or Chinese advisor, imposed strict rules of engagement. You could not fire until you had positive visual identification of the enemy. Think about what that means. You have a multi-million-dollar jet with a 30-mile missile, and you have to fly close enough to see the red star on your enemy's tail. The entire BVR doctrine was thrown out the window before the first shot was even fired. And waiting for them in that close-range fight was an opponent the computers had completely underestimated. The Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-17. It was an old design, small, simple, and subsonic. On paper, the Phantom should have eaten it for lunch. But the North Vietnamese pilots, guided by expert ground controllers, didn't fight the Phantom's fight. They used their jet strengths. They would wait in the radar clutter, get the Phantom to bleed at speed, and then pull it into a turning fight. A knife fight in a phone booth. In those tight circles, the heavy, energy-bleeding Phantom was a sitting duck. The results were catastrophic. The wonder weapon, the AIM-7 Sparrow missile, was a disaster. It required the Phantom to keep its nose pointed at the MiG for the entire flight of the missile. In a swirling dogfight, that was a death sentence. The official kill probability for the Sparrow in 1967 was less than 9%. 9 out of 10 failed. The proud American kill-to-loss ratio, which had been over 10-to-1 in previous wars, plummeted. On some days, it was barely 2-to-1. Of the most expensive Air Force ever assembled was being fought to a standstill by a handful of older, cheaper jets. The technology was failing. The training was wrong. The entire philosophy of modern air combat was collapsing in on itself. This created a terrifying question, whispered in ready rooms and shouted in debriefs. A question the Pentagon did not want to answer. If your perfect weapon is useless and your pilots are trained for a war that doesn't exist, how do you stop the dying? The date is January 2nd, 1967. The skies over North Vietnam are a cold, metallic gray. You are flying at 15,000 feet, part of a massive formation. But something is wrong. Everything is wrong. Your aircraft is an F-4 Phantom. a brutal twin-engine fighter designed to kill other jets from miles away. Yet, to the enemy radar below, you look like something else entirely. You look predictable. You look like lunch. This was the heart of Operation Bolo, a deception of magnificent audacity orchestrated by one man who was fed up with losing. Colonel Robin Olds. His plan was simple, yet brilliant. He would make his pack of wolves look like a flock of sheep. His F-4 Phantoms would mimic the exact flight patterns, call signs, and radar signatures of the lumbering F-105 Thunderchief bombers. The thuds. The MiGs loved hunting thuds, and they were easy prey. To pull it off, Olds' team fitted their F-4s with special electronic pods, the QRC-160. These pods made the agile fighters broadcast the exact electronic signature of a bomber wing. It was a technological phantom limb, a ghost on the screen. The North Vietnamese ground controllers saw exactly what Olds wanted them to see. A routine bombing run, predictable, vulnerable. They scrambled their fighters. The trap was set. The bait was taken. And here's the part nobody talks about. The American pilots were flying with a weapon they hadn't used in years. Their missiles were notoriously unreliable. They wanted a close-in fight, a knife fight in a phone booth. The MiGs rose from their airfields at Phu Quyen and Gia Lam, climbing through the clouds, expecting to find fat bombers. Instead, they found the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, the Wolfpack, and the Wolfpack was hungry. Imagine the shock in that cockpit. You're a MiG-21 pilot. You punch through the overcast layer, ready for an easy kill. And you're met with the sight of 12 F-4 Phantoms turning hard into you. Missiles already leaving the rails. There was no escape. The sky erupted. For 12 minutes, it was a perfectly executed slaughter. One MiG went down, then another. Radio calls stacked on top of each other. Splash one. Good kill, good kill. He's on your 6. It was absolute chaos. Colonel Olds himself shot down a MiG-21, his first of 4 aerial victories in Vietnam. His wingman, Captain Ralph Wetterhahn, got another. Major Philip Combes got 1. Captain Walter Radiker III. The list went on. When the smoke cleared, the results were staggering. 7 North Vietnamese MiG-21s, nearly half their operational fleet, were confirmed destroyed. The Americans suffered 0 losses. Not a single F-4 was even seriously damaged. The kill ratio for the day was 7-0, a number that seemed impossible just the day before. For months, American pilots had been the prey. Today, they were the hunters. The North Vietnamese were so stunned, so completely outplayed, they grounded their entire air force for months. They refused to engage. The skies were clear. A total victory. But think about what that means. The trap was so perfect, it could only be sprung once. And while the pilots celebrated, the bureaucracy back in Washington learned the wrong lesson. They saw the victory as proof that their technology worked. They missed the real point, the point Robin Olds was screaming. It wasn't about the hardware, it was about the mindset. It was about deception, training, and the desperate need for a cannon on the F-4 for close-range dogfights. The system celebrated the win, but it punished the maverick who delivered it. Olds was a hero, but his calls for change were quietly shelved. They had won the most decisive air battle of the war. But had they actually learned anything at all? The silence was the worst part. Back on the carrier, after a mission, you would walk through the ready room, and you would see the empty chairs. You knew the names of the men who were supposed to be sitting there. You saw their coffee mugs, still half full, their letters home, waiting to be finished. For every 2 MiGs shot down over North Vietnam, an American pilot and his multi-million-dollar jet vanished from the sky. Sometimes it was 1 for 1, a trade, a terrible, unspeakable trade. The Pentagon had promised a war won by technology, by silver birds firing missiles from beyond visual range. But you were in the cockpit. You felt the gut-wrenching G-forces as a tiny MiG-17 got on your 6. You heard the terrifying growl of a heat-seeking missile locking onto your engine's exhaust. And you knew the promise was a lie. But here's the part nobody talks about. The real battle wasn't just fought at 30,000 feet, it was fought in a quiet office, against their own leadership. In 1968, the Navy had finally had enough. They commissioned a report, a top-to-bottom, brutally honest investigation led by a man named Captain Frank Ault. The Ault Report. It was over 400 pages long, and it was dynamite. It confirmed what every pilot already knew in their bones. The problem wasn't a lack of courage, the problem was the training and the technology. The billion-dollar Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles? They failed nearly 90% of the time. They were designed to shoot down lumbering Soviet bombers, not a nimble fighter turning on a dime. The American pilots, trained for sterile long-range combat, were being thrown into a knife fight in a phone booth. They had never even trained against a small, agile aircraft like the ones they were facing. They were learning in the sky, and the tuition was paid in blood. Ault's conclusion was simple and revolutionary. The United States Navy had to go back to school. They needed to create a new kind of graduate program, a place to unlearn everything they thought they knew about air combat. It wasn't glamorous at first. On March 3, 1969, the United States Navy Fighter Weapons School opened its doors. The headquarters? A stolen trailer on a dusty parking lot at Naval Air Station Miramar in California. The instructors, guys like Dan Peterson, were brilliant, combat-hardened veterans. They had to beg and borrow older, smaller A-4 Skyhawks to act as the enemy MiGs. They called it dissimilar air combat training. For the first time, you, the F-4 Phantom pilot, would face an instructor whose only job was to study Soviet tactics and exploit every weakness in your aircraft. They taught you to see the fight in 3 dimensions, to feel the energy of your aircraft as if it were part of your own body. They retaught the lost art of the dogfight. A young pilot, let's call him Duke, sits in one of those makeshift classrooms. He's seen friends die. He's felt the frustration of a missile that wouldn't track. He absorbs every lesson. He flies against the instructors, losing at first, then learning, adapting. He masters the new geometry of death. Now his training is over. He packs his bags. He is heading back to Vietnam, back to the same sliver of sky that took his friends. He carries the lessons from a desert classroom back into the jungle air. But as his F-4 is chained to the deck of the carrier, steaming toward the war zone, you have to wonder, will this new knowledge be enough? The results from Top Gun were immediate, and they were brutal. The Navy's kill-to-loss ratio against the MiGs skyrocketed from a painful 2-to-1 to an astonishing 12-to-1. The lesson had been learned. The pilot was put back in the center of the equation. For a time. Today, you can stand on a flight line and look at an F-35 Lightning II. It is not just a jet. It is a flying, stealth-enabled supercomputer. Its sensors see in every direction at once, sharing data with every friendly asset for hundreds of miles. The pilot has a god's-eye view of the entire battle space, a perfect picture. The enemy is a small red diamond on a glowing screen, long before they even know they are being watched. This is the ultimate technological solution, a machine designed to make the close-in, visceral dogfight completely obsolete. And here's where you should pause and think. Does any of that sound familiar? It is the same promise wrapped in a new century, the absolute belief that technology has finally, once and for all, conquered the chaos of human conflict. There was an Air Force fighter pilot, Colonel John Boyd, a legend. He developed a simple theory to explain a complex reality. He called it the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Boyd argued that victory goes to the side that can cycle through that loop faster. Not the one with the fastest plane or the longest range missile, but the one with the fastest mind. The Vietnamese pilots in their aging MiG-21s proved him right. They could not outfly the Phantom, but they could consistently outthink its pilot. Their orientation was raw instinct. It was the feel of the jet vibrating at its breaking point. It was a flash of insight from a calm voice on a ground radar. It was human, and it was messy. Our modern systems are designed to clean up that mess, to make observation instant, to make decision-making flawless. But they struggle with that mysterious middle step: orientation, the part that requires context, experience, and a gut feeling you can't program. Think about what that means. We have built the perfect hunter, a machine that sees all and processes terabytes of data in the time it takes you to blink. It is designed to fight another predictable system. But what happens when it faces an enemy with nothing but an old jet, a brilliant mind, and a move that makes no sense on any screen? As we build machines to erase human error from war, what have we lost if human unpredictability was our greatest weapon all along?